All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar for today. We go ahead and get started. We're a little bit early, so I'm just going to kind of hang out here for a bit while more people get started, join us today. I see we have a number of people already. While we're waiting though, I would love to get to know you a little bit better. So in the chat section, please introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're calling in or viewing from today. And let's kind of start with like one of those corny, cheesy icebreaker questions. For today, let's do a question of, was there any person in your life? And this could be like a real person, a fictional person. Maybe you knew this person, like you're in your family, or they're a mentor to you, or you like this is just like a celebrity or someone you don't know. Was there any person who inspired you to pursue a legal career? Let us know in the chat, along with introducing yourself, letting us know where you're from. I'll get started on that. What led me to pursue a legal career, kind of embarrassingly, was the character in the show, The OC, Sandy Cohen. He was like a lawyer in that show. It's really embarrassing on a number of counts. That like ages me really bad. And it's also like a kind of corny teen drama. But let me know what you think. What inspired you? Who inspired you to go to law school? And while you're responding in the chat section, I will bring up what we're doing today. So we are going to be talking about timing today. I'm really excited to talk about timing with y'all today. One of the most common concerns test takers have when approaching the LSAT is timing. So we're going to be talking about how to get faster on the LSAT, how to do everything you need to do on this test within the very limited amount of time that they provide to you. So we'll be talking about that. Really excited to talk with y'all about that. And let us know who you are in the chat section. If you haven't already, you can change your to-line to all panelist attendees and just reach out to me. By the way, my name is Ross Reinhardt. I am the Director of Content at LSATMax. I've been teaching the LSAT for about 10 years now. Started recently with LSATMax, really excited to work with all of the LSATMax community on improving their scores. And I'll be leading you on this discussion of timing tips today. So again, some responses from y'all. Samantha from Virginia had a cousin that inspired Samantha. That's awesome to hear. Polly got some Elle Woods inspiration in addition to Ellie's dad. Susan, Hill Street Blues. Hey, Susan. Got Thurgood Marshall. Not only a great inspiration to pursue a legal career, Christina, but also someone who's going to appear quite a bit on the test. The LSAT itself, there's like 2 or 3 different reading comprehension passages about Thurgood Marshall. So if you're just joining us, we're just kind of introducing ourselves in the chat section, and we're talking about the person who inspired us to pursue a legal career. If there was a person, that can be real, fictional, something you knew, something you didn't know. Really excited to hear all of your responses. Thank you for all of those who have responded so far. All right, so eagerly await reading your responses in the chat section. Why don't we get started on what we're actually here to do today, which is talk about timing on the LSAT. So it's going to be a 2-hour topic. It's a big topic, right? Timing on the LSAT is a really major concern that a lot of test takers have. So this is a 2-hour-long webinar so that we can give that big topic the space and attention that it needs. However, I'm going to try to fit my presentation into about 90 minutes. 90 minutes to go over timing and all the tips I have for timing so that we can preserve about 30 minutes at the end of today's lesson to address your questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like addressed at the end of this webinar, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar platform. At the end of this lesson, I'm just going to go to that Q&A and answer all of those questions. So if you have a question that you like answered at the end, put it in the Q&A section. As we can already see, we're responding in the chat section. Great to hear your responses. If you have like a quick question that pertains to something that I'm talking about, like at the moment that you want answered immediately, go ahead and put your question in the chat section, and I'll try to answer those as I'm going. So Q&A, if you want it answered at the end, when I'm doing the Q&A section at the end, chat if you want it answered immediately, if it like pertains to something that we're talking about. Cool, so I'm gonna kind of look up your responses. Let's see, we got a number of attorneys for Lauren who's working in a higher education office. RBG, seeing a couple of them. Elle Woods is always a popular one. Law and Order, Just Mercy, a lot of pop culture ones. That's great. That makes me feel better about my responses, which was a character from the show, The OC. If y'all gone back to watch that one. All right, so let's get started on what we're talking about today with timing. So here's the agenda for today. Now, I'm really excited for this first thing that we're going to talk about today, which is dispelling common misconceptions about timing. I think this is actually going to be kind of the most important thing that we're going to talk about today, because there are a lot of misconceptions about the LSAT in general. That's why, you know, companies like LSATMax exists, so that we can help students understand what they don't understand about the LSAT. However, timing specifically is subject to a number of misconceptions, ideas that aren't entirely accurate. So we're gonna actually start today by dispelling some of the all too common misunderstandings that a lot of test takers have about timing. Really excited to do that section. Then we're gonna talk about when you should actually incorporate timed practice into your studies. And we're also going to talk about how to incorporate that timed practice into your studies, ways that'll actually enable you to get faster on the LSAT in a real, substantial, productive way. Then we'll move on to the finishing touches. These are some tricks that you can utilize towards the end of your studies to help maximize the number of questions you're answering correctly on the LSAT. And then, as promised, we're going to wrap things up with a little bit of Q&A at the end. And again, if you'd like your questions answered in that at the end of this session, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section of the webinar platform, and I'll kind of go through those at the end of this. Okay, so first up is dispelling misconceptions about timing. And we're starting with this because the lessons that we're going to learn when dispelling these misconceptions about timing will kind of reverberate through this entire presentation. Really, all of the timing tips I have for you are going to relate back to the lessons we learn when dispelling these misconceptions. So if you're just starting your LSAT studies, I would really encourage you to write notes down during this section. Following the lessons we learn here will help you avoid a lot of all too common stumbling blocks that students experience when studying for the LSAT. So it can really hopefully make your study process a lot more efficient and productive overall if you follow the pieces of advice we're going to discuss here. Now, if you are in the middle of your LSAT studies, maybe if you're kind of addressing timing at this point in your LSAT studies, I just ask that you keep an open mind during this section. There's a good chance that you're currently operating under the assumptions that are kind of baked into some of these misconceptions. And it's a way for you to maybe change your approach and avoid, or at least surpass, some of the stumbling blocks that might be preventing you from doing as many questions as you can on the LSAT. So let's go over some of these misconceptions. Misconception number one that people say all the time on the LSAT is that timing is my main problem on the LSAT. Let me know in the chat section if you thought this, if you've been studying for the LSAT. Oh, timing is clearly the main issue I have on the LSAT. I've been teaching for a long time, and this is something I hear all the time. It's one of the most common refrains that I hear from students. Timing is my main problem on the LSAT. But that is a wrong way to look at things. And I know that image is like really kind of aggressive. It's there for emphasis. I hope you don't, if you do think this way, you don't take take offense to this, but this is not the right way to think about timing on this exam. Feels this way to almost every test taker, that timing is a major issue on the LSAT. But here's what is actually true. Most timing problems are actually understanding or approach problems. Well, what does that mean? Well, it feels like things are taking too long on the LSAT because you're not utilizing a sound approach, or you don't have the requisite understanding to approach that question. If you think about it, why do things take longer than they should on the LSAT? It's not just that it was designed to take a really long time. The reason it takes longer on the LSAT is because you don't know the right answer. And it takes you a long time to figure out the right answer. That's why timing feels like such a strongly felt problem on this test. Now, if the timing was the main problem, the only really solution to that is to try to go faster. It's like, how do you go faster? I don't know. You just practice more, hopefully get through it. But if we think instead about timing as a symptom of another problem, a problem with your understanding or approach, there are going to be solutions to that. Think about it this way. Let's say you have a fever. That is the condition that ails you. A symptom of that fever might be chills. And you might want to solve that symptom of the fever by like putting on a sweater or going under a heavy blanket. But is that going to actually solve your fever? Does going under a heavy jacket or sweater or blanket actually solve the fever? No, of course not. You need to solve the fever through other means. If you just do the blanket or the sweater or the jacket, you're just addressing a symptom of the problem and not the problem itself. And a lot of people, when they think about timing, they implement solutions that are addressed solely on timing. What can I do to go faster? Can I read faster? Can I skip steps? Can I not read everything on the test? When you're doing that, that's kind of like throwing a blanket over the problem. You're dealing with the symptom, but not the actual problem itself. The problem is, generally speaking, a problem with understanding and getting those fundamentals down. That's absolutely right, Mary. So trying to fix the timing problem by just addressing the timing is so often misguided because it's ignoring the real issue, which is your understanding. And as we're going to talk about later today, so much of getting faster on the LSAT is a direct result of getting better at understanding the material and having a practiced, solid approach to every single question. Okay, so that's misconception number one. Misconception number two, I can't finish a section of the LSAT because I'm not reading fast enough. I have heard this so often from test takers. It's particularly true for a lot of test takers on reading comprehension, but it really affects logical reasoning as well. A lot of people think, I'm not finishing the section because I'm just not reading fast enough. I'm a slow reader. I can't get through it as quickly as I want to. I need to read faster. And again, with the aggressive image, that is wrong. Yes, it's kind of shouting it at us. But it's important to understand why this is wrong. I'm going to show you why it's wrong, the little bit of math. Okay, the comfortable reading speed of the average adult is about 200 to 250 words per minute. Now, your reading speed is probably more than that. I'm going to make some assumptions about who you are. Maybe this doesn't apply to you, but statistically speaking, most of you are educated and probably studied a topic that involved a lot of reading, whether that was like a humanities major that you pursued or a social science major. You probably had to read a lot. So you're like not only an educated person, you're a really practiced, experienced reader. Also, given the age that most people are at when they take the LSAT, you're probably operating near your peak of short-term memory and information processing. So I would actually venture to guess that most of you have a reading speed of at least 300 words per minute. But the LSAT is harder to read than most things, so we'll operate under this assumption that you're reading at about a rate of 200 to 250 words per minute. So you can read and understand somewhere in that range. Now, the typical logical reasoning and reading comprehension sections have, on average, about 450 words in total. All right, so does anyone want to take a stab at the math of this? How long would it take you with this reading speed to read every single word of these sections? How long would it take? Let me know in the chat section. Well, if you're reading at a rate of 250 words per minute, it would take you about 18 minutes to read that entire section. If you're reading at a rate of 200 words per minute, it would take you about 22 and a half minutes to read that entire section. Okay, Kiara, you got it. First on the math. I know math is not our strong suit. Those of us who pursue the law, and that's okay, but I'll do the math for you, or Kiara, I got the math for you. Yeah, between 18 and 22 minutes to read the entire section. How much time do you have on a given section? Well, if you're getting the standard test with the standard time, you have 35 minutes. So you have a surplus of at least 12 and a half minutes. So on top of reading everything, you have at least 12 and a half minutes. You might even have, what is that, 17 minutes to read, to answer the questions on top of reading. This is something that you always want to remind yourself. Because if you think this way, if you think that you can't finish a section because you're not reading fast enough, consciously or subconsciously, you're going to try to read faster. But if you try to read faster, that's going to have a couple problems. You're trying to read faster, you're going to understand the material as well? No, of course not. You try to read faster, are you going to be as accurate in your responses to the questions? Probably not. And not only that, if you try to read faster, you're just attempting to solve a problem that doesn't exist, because you have plenty of time to read the material. Even if you're operating on the low end of this reading speed, even if you're below this reading speed, you're going to have more time than you need to read the section. So don't try to read faster as a means of speeding up on the LSAT. This test really has a way of punishing people who try to read faster. It's not the problem. That's not why you're failing to finish the section. It's not because you're not reading fast enough. I've really never met a test taker who did not read fast enough to finish a section. Okay, finally, common misconception number 3 on the test. This takes too long on an actual exam, so I shouldn't do it. And this is a misconception not only held by a lot of test takers, it's a misconception held by a lot of people who teach the LSAT. And this is really unfortunate, because this just gets bad advice out there in the LSAT prep community, and people follow this bad advice, and it has really unfortunate effects on their score. So this is a really common misconception that not only affects people who take the LSAT, but also the people who teach the LSAT. And I just want to convey that it is not the right way to think about timing on this test. Something on the LSAT only takes too long if there's a viable alternative that takes less time. Now, people say this takes too long in an actual exam, so I shouldn't do it, about all sorts of things on this test. They talk about things like diagramming conditional statements. They talk about things like annotating passages, actually making notes for the passages that you're reading in reading comprehension. They talk about this with respect to making deductions or scenarios or worlds in your games, like actually writing out things that you can deduce to be true on that game before doing those questions. People say, you know what, this might help, but it just takes too long, so I shouldn't do it on the actual exam. You might notice that there's something that kind of unites all of these things that people say this takes too long about. All of these things tend to involve writing things down on your scratch paper as you take the test. So all of this is like write stuff down strategies. It's like, oh, I can't do that on the actual test. It takes too long to write stuff down. I've taught the LSAT for about a decade, and there are two things that I've noticed that most test takers tend to overestimate, often very dramatically. Number one, many test takers overestimate how long it takes to write stuff down. Like it feels like it takes a lot of time, feels like when you're writing something down, it's really eating away at the clock. But if you actually time yourself when you're writing down a couple conditional statements for a logical reasoning question, or the notes you're making on a passage, or the deductions you're drawing in a game, it really does not take as much time as you think. Feels like it takes a long time because you're doing work, you're doing something, but it does not take as much time as it feels. People overestimate how long it takes to write something down. People also overestimate their ability to keep track of multiple variables in their head. They think they're a lot better at keeping track of multiple things in their head than they actually are. And maybe you can see how this would lead to some problems. You're not writing down the multiple variables on the paper because you think it takes too long. But by doing so, you're trying to keep track of all these things in your head, which can lead to a lot of mistakes and sometimes even you taking longer than it should take. So a lot of these kind of writing stuff down strategies, they don't take too long because there's really not a better, faster alternative to these strategies. So we'll talk about some things that do take too much time, things for which there are viable alternatives that take less time. But a lot of these sound approaches you're going to learn in your prep are things that you should do on the test as well. We'll talk about how you can get faster at these things, but they're not things that should be completely avoided under the assumption that they take too long. Okay, so those are the three major misconceptions people have about this test. Does anyone have any questions about these? Because like I said, you should be writing these things down, especially if you're starting off on your study program. And these are going to be the lessons that we're going to be referring to constantly throughout the rest of this process today. So any questions before we proceed? If you don't have any questions, you just type in the chat box, okay, or I'm ready, something like that. If you do have a question, I'll wait just a second for you to type out that question. Okay, we are looking like we're mostly ready. We have the knowledge that has enlightened us, got us past these misconceptions. So let's actually go to the next part of our topic today, when to address timing in your study process. All right, when should you actually start thinking about timing in your study process? Okay, so when you're studying for the LSAT, broadly speaking, there should be two stages of your study process. And we're going over in this slide an overview of both stages of a solid study plan, and then we'll address some common questions about each stage in subsequent slides. First stage of your study plan should be called learning time. At this stage, you're focused on learning the concepts and acquiring the skills. You're practicing this with a lot of repetitive, targeted practice. So you're learning how to do different questions, and you are practicing those questions over and over and over again. Now, at this stage, when you're learning, you should not address timing. Practice at this stage should be untimed. Now, don't worry in the learning time stage if it's taking you a long time to finish questions. You do notice there's an asterisk at the end of that. There are a couple exceptions to this, and we'll get into that in just a bit. But the point is, we shouldn't be addressing timing in this learning time stage. At least we shouldn't be thinking about timing explicitly. We'll be dealing with timing kind of under the radar with our practice during this time. And in fact, we'll get a lot faster during this learning time stage, but timing isn't going to be an over concern of ours at this learning time. What we're going to focus on instead is just learning how to do things and practicing how to do things. There's a second stage of our study time, and that is called practice time. And in practice time, we'll start to incorporate timed practice, whether that timed practice interval involves small sets of questions or passages or games, or doing full sections from a practice test, or even doing full practice tests. So at the practice time, we'll start to incorporate timed practice. Okay, but if we think about those two stages, look at first stage, not too concerned about timing. Second stage will be focused about timing. There's a lot of questions that kind of are involved. So, okay, if we're not focused on timing in the first stage, what are we focused on? Okay, when do we switch from learning time to practice time? At what point are we like kind of should make that switch? What do we do in practice time to help us get faster, if anything? So at this point, I'm going to try to answer all of these questions as best as I can. Now, what are we focused on in learning time? Well, we're focused on two things generally. We focused on understanding and accuracy. Understanding will include a number of things. But remember, this all relates back to the lesson we learned from misconception number 1. Most timing problems are actually understanding and approach problems. So if we're going to get faster on the LSAT, what we need to do, first order of business, is make sure we have a strong understanding and a really strong set of approaches. I notice there's a question in the chat section right now. Will the slideshow be posted somewhere? We will not be posting the slideshow. However, you will be given a recording of this. So if you want to review these slides later on, that recording will be available for you. It looks like my colleague, Katie, just answered that for you. So thank you, Katie. This will be posted for you, Priya. Okay, so focused on understanding and approaches. We're focused on accuracy, and those things are going to include a number of things. Understanding is going to include like how to just classify the various types of questions and passages and games in the 3 sections of the LSAT. So noting like, okay, this is a must be true question, whereas this is a parallel reasoning question, whereas this is a paradox question. Or this is a grouping game, this is a sequencing game, this is a multilinear game, this is a hybrid game, or this is a solitary passage where the author is present versus a comparative passages where the authors largely disagree. It's going to kind of learn how to classify and develop approaches for the various types of the 3 sections. You're also going to want to develop during this learning time a really strong understanding of why the correct answer is correct and why the incorrect answers are incorrect. And I know that kind of sounds a little bit obvious, but I've noticed with a lot of test takers, they tend to kind of not give this their full attention. They're just kind of like, okay, I got that wrong, but I've read the explanation. I can kind of see why the right answer is right and why the right answer I chose is wrong. But they don't really force themselves to truly understand why the correct answers are correct and why the incorrect answers are incorrect. So an exercise that you can do to really force yourself to understand why correct answers are correct and incorrect answers are incorrect during this stage is to actually write it out. When you write out an explanation of why something is correct and why something is incorrect, you really are forced to become articulate. And when you're writing something out, you can more clearly see, okay, actually what I said here doesn't make a lot of sense. Let me review this question. Let me actually figure out why exactly this is right or why exactly this is wrong. When you're writing something out, it really helps to try to explain it in a way that like a reasonably intelligent 5th grader could understand. Being able to like dumb things down on the LSAT in a way that like, you know, a child can understand is actually a really, really strong skill, because if you do that, you really understand this material. So an exercise you can do during learning time to help you understand why things are correct and incorrect, writing it out. Another part of understanding during this stage is going to be knowing your own strengths and weaknesses as a test taker and using that to prioritize review time throughout your studies. So knowing, okay, I'm really strong at this question type or this type of passage or this section of the LSAT, I don't need to make that a priority in my study time, but I'm not doing as well with this type of question or this type of passage or this section of the LSAT. I need to prioritize that in my study time. And a way that you can really track your strengths and weaknesses is keeping a question journal. A journal where you write down what type of question you missed, why you missed it, and what you can do differently the next time you do a question like that one to avoid making that same mistake. And that really forces you to see patterns in how you're answering questions. And in doing so, you can start to identify weaknesses that you can prioritize in your review. Meisha has a question that I'll answer before going on to accuracy. Meisha asks, do you recommend someone studying for the LSAT to take a timed test and an untimed test to get an accurate baseline LSAT score? No, I would not recommend taking both. First diagnostic test you should take before studying, take a timed. One, that will give you an accurate representation of what your score is. Yes, your score would probably be higher if it was untimed, but you're taking the real test time, so it's not really a great use of your time to take a test untimed at the beginning of the study before you really know what you're doing. So first diagnostic, kind of before you start learning time, test that you take should be timed. It's also important that you take that one time just to know what you're up against in terms of the very real time pressure of the test. So you took that test, you're in learning time, you're learning how to understand the classifications, approaches, why things are right, your own strengths and weaknesses. You're also focused on accuracy. And accuracy means the proportion of questions that you're answering correctly, consistently and over time. So how accurate are you? And that's going to be important, this accuracy, determining when you can move on from learning time to practice time. So if we're not focused on timing during learning time, if we're just focusing on doing things correctly and on time practice, do we not worry about timing at all? And the answer to that is no, except for one thing. The approaches we practice untimed need to mimic the approaches that we'll employ on the real test. Sometimes test takers get into a habit of practicing very time-consuming approaches that will not work on the real exam. Remember lesson number 3 we were talking about earlier? That it's only taking too long, a strategy only takes too long if there's a viable alternative that takes less time. Well, a lot of times people get in the habit of practicing things for which there is a viable alternative that takes less time. These are not things that we should be practicing during our learning time. These are things like rereading the stimulus or short passage when assessing each logical reasoning answer choice. So it's like you read the passage, you read the question stem, you read the first answer choice, you're like, I don't know if that's right or wrong. Let me reread the stimulus again. You're like, okay, I think that's wrong. You go on to answer choice B. I don't know if that's right or wrong. Let me take another look at the stimulus. Let me read that again. You're not going to have time to do that on the real test, so you should not be practicing it during learning time. Even if we're not really concerned about timing during learning time, that's a bad habit. That's going to prevent us from doing these questions with a better, less time-consuming approach. Same thing is true of testing every single answer choice in logic answer with its own setup. Like, okay, E, I don't know if this is true or false. Let me write out the setup, incorporate the things in E, see if it works. Okay, that's not going to work. D, let's see if that's going to work. Let me try out everything. No, that's not going to work. C, let me try out the same, write out a new setup. You're not going to have time to do that on the real test, so you should be practicing it even during learning time. For reading comprehension, this involves like reading lengthy excerpts of the passage for many answer choices over and over again. In fact, we want to kind of minimize the amount of time reading the passage for a second time on reading comprehension. So doing that is going to be a time-consuming habit that there's a better alternative for. So although we're not going to be overtly, explicitly worried about timing during the learning time stage, we don't want to instill bad habits that are going to prevent us from, eventually doing the full section in time. So if these take too long to work effectively on the real exam, there's viable alternatives that take less time. So we shouldn't practice these even during learning time. Now, another question that a lot of people have is that, okay, so I won't get faster during learning time. If I'm not focused on timing, then I'm not going to get faster. And that is actually untrue. You should actually get substantially faster during learning time if you're approaching learning time correctly. You may not notice these improvements, and these improvements may take quite a bit of time to actually manifest. However, if you're doing learning time correctly, they will happen. If you practice sound approaches, you'll eventually get faster and more effective at employing these approaches. Does anyone have any skills, hobbies, things like that they picked up over this last 16 months of a lot of at-home time? Let me know in the chat section. Was there any kind of skills, hobbies, like cooking stuff, or maybe a athletic endeavor or hobby that you picked up? Okay, Sean, right out the gate with a great example, chess. So I will, really, another great one with guitar. That's awesome. So thank you guys for applying it. I'm actually use Mary, your example, because you included an emoji, and I like that illustration there too. Mary, when you first started playing the guitar, were you really fast at changing chords or playing notes? Could you play really fast right away? I'm gonna guess no. Very, very slow. Was that because, Mary, you were doomed to be a slow guitar player for the rest of your guitar playing days, that there was no hopes that you would ever get faster? Or is it because you were just learning and that it felt a little bit weird to have to change chords, play different notes, do those things with the guitar? It's just because it was new. With a lot of practice, did you start to get more comfortable with changing chords, playing different notes, running scales, doing all the guitar things that you do? Yeah, with practice, you probably got a lot faster. And that is because you start to get more comfortable with these things. Same thing is true for a lot of these things that I'm seeing. Jay Lau learning Italian, you probably spoke Italian very, very slow. And Italians, as we know, speak very, very fast. I'm a quarter Italian, so I can say that kind of reductive thing. But with practice, I'm guessing, Jay Lau, you started to speak Italian a little bit more quickly. Guessing, Lauren, that's hilarious, napping. Yeah, I've become a great napper. I can nap faster now with a lot of experience too. Chess, Sean, you probably got a lot faster with how you make your decisions in chess as well. So yeah, I do, Alicia, I totally avoided Noah's example of smoking meat because that's the one thing where it's slower is actually better. So yep. So anyway, the point is that if you're slow initially, it's not because you're bad at it or that it's not a good approach or it's not going to work out for you in the end. If you're slow initially, it's just because you're not experienced with it. And with more practice, you get a lot faster. So just like how Mary got faster at playing guitar, or how Jay Lau got faster at speaking Italian, or how Sean got faster at playing chess, with a lot of practice, you'll actually get faster with using the approaches on the LSAT as well. You will diagram more quickly in logic games and logical reasoning. You'll annotate more efficiently in reading comprehension. The anticipations you make in logical reasoning and reading comprehension will come a lot faster. And you'll deduce a lot faster in logic games. You'll see the connections between rules, the things that can't be true, the things that must be true, more quickly with practice. And it may not feel faster early on. It might feel, in fact, slower initially, but that's okay. Remember, in order to get faster, we need to have a better understanding and a good approach. Most timing problems are understanding and approach problems. So if we get better with the approach, we will get faster at the LSAT. And in fact, this is where most of the improvements of your timing will take place. So learning time, you're not even thinking about timing really, but if you're doing it correctly, if you're practicing these sound approaches over and over again, you will get faster at employing them. But here's the caveat, and here's the hard part. It's going to be difficult. It's going to feel slower early on. It's not going to feel like the most efficient way or the most natural way, or for some of us, the most intuitive way to solve a question. But we have to keep on. We have to persevere. We have to keep trying these approaches, because when we get the better approach, that's when we really start to go faster on the LSAT. And that's one thing I want us all to take away from this. This is where we're going to make our real timing gains on the LSAT. We got to practice the approaches. And for a lot of us, we got to practice the approaches a lot. But with that practice, we'll eventually get faster. Does that make sense to everyone? That makes sense? It all sinks in. We're going to make sure that we keep up at practicing these approaches repetitively during learning time. Even though we're doing things untimed, we're practicing good approaches that eventually become easier and more comfortable for us. Awesome. Good to hear. Okay. Now, when do we switch? When do we decide enough of learning time, now it's time for practice time? Second stage in my studies. Well, it's going to be when your accuracy, untimed, exceeds the accuracy your target score would require. So this is the point where we're going to make that switch. When we've gotten really good at the approaches, where our understanding has really bumped up, and now we're answering questions at a rate that is going to exceed the accuracy that our target score would require. So I've included on this slide a number of target scores that many test takers have, and the accuracy you'd want to hit in order to earn that target score. So you can see like 170, super common target score that people have. You want to be answering at least 90% of the questions you answer untimed accurately. Some people aim a little bit higher. They want 175 or higher. In order to get that untimed, you're going to need to answer about 95% of the questions correctly. So if you answer 20 questions, you can get 19 of them correct. Some of us are aiming for a 160, and we can see like it's like 75% of the questions correctly. So this is a really important turning point in your studies. Remember, when I talked about accuracy earlier, we were talking about consistently over time. That's what we mean when we talk about accuracy. A lot of people say like, oh, on the last practice set I did, I got 75% of the questions correct. I did 20 questions. I got 15 of them correct. So now my accuracy is officially 75% and I'm ready to move on to practice time. And if it's only one time that you got that 75% and all other times you're answering like 60% of the questions correctly, your accuracy isn't quite at 75% yet, which means you just need to stay in that learning time and keep at it, keep working on the approaches, keep working on that understanding by writing out why answers are right and wrong, by keeping track of your question journal and reviewing your weaknesses based on that question journal, until your accuracy is consistently over time at that 75%. Once your accuracy consistently exceeds the accuracy that your target score would require, you're ready to move on to practice time. So practice time. This is where we start thinking about timing. So when we're thinking about timing, do we start taking full practice tests? Well, maybe, but not necessarily. It really depends on your speed at that point. Now, some test takers start off pretty fast. I know it's kind of annoying that some people are like that, but that is how some people are. They start off pretty fast and timing isn't a huge concern with them. And some people are able to increase their speed to test speed simply by doing learning time. So by learning and practicing the approaches, they get to test speed. For other of us, we need to shave off a bit more time before we're actually ready for test speed. So we have an exercise for people in that latter group. If you've worked your way through learning time, and you've met that accuracy or exceeded the accuracy that your target score would require, but you're still not going fast enough, we have an exercise for you. But first of all, let's just talk about what that means to not go fast enough. How do you know if you're going fast enough? Well, think about how long it's taking you to finish like easier to medium difficulty level logical reasoning questions. You should be answering those between 1 minute and 1 minute and 30 seconds. Consistently. If you can consistently answer the easier to medium difficulty level logical reasoning questions between that time, you're at test speed. You can move on to full practice exams if you want. How long does it take you to finish easy to medium difficulty level reading comp passages or logic games? Should be about 7 or 8 minutes. If you can do that consistently, you're ready for full practice exams. You're ready for test speed. If it takes you longer though, that's okay. You just need to spend a little bit of time at the beginning of practice time, easing your way into test speed. And the exercise I would encourage you to do to shave off that last bit of time before practice time is going to be doing small practice sets. Start with 10 easy to medium difficulty logical reasoning questions. If you need to find 10 easy to medium difficulty logical reasoning questions, you can take any old practice exam, just take the first 10 questions. Those tend to be almost always in that easy to medium difficulty level. Give yourself 20 minutes to complete that. Now, of course, that's more time than you should take for these questions on the exam, in all likelihood. Remember, we're going to ease our way into test speed. So if you can answer those 10 easy to medium difficulty logical reasoning questions in 20 minutes, and this is important, maintain your accuracy that your target score require, that's great. Shave some time off. Maybe on the second try, take a different 10 easy to medium difficulty level logical reasoning questions and give yourself 18 minutes to answer them. If you can answer those 10 questions in 18 minutes and maintain your accuracy, that is awesome. Shave a little bit more time off. So slowly and incrementally, we want to shave off time from that 20 minutes until it gets to about 15 minutes, where you can comfortably answer those 10 easy to medium difficulty logical reasoning questions in 15 minutes and maintain our accuracy that our target score require. We can do the same for logic games and reading comprehension passages. Take 2 easy to medium difficulty logic games or reading comp passages. Again, these can usually just be the first 2 games or passages in a section of a practice test. Give yourself 24 minutes to do those 2 games or passages. If you complete those with your accuracy intact, slowly reduce those time. Take a different 2 games or passages, try to do them in 22 minutes. If you can do them in 22 minutes and maintain your accuracy, then try to do them in 21 minutes, and then 20 minutes, and so on, until you get to being able to comfortably complete these in about 15 minutes. That way you're not going straight from the speed you're doing at learning time to test speed and torpedoing your accuracy. You're able to maintain your accuracy by slowly and incrementally reducing the time, easing yourself into test speed, little by little, getting faster, or at least getting more comfortable with that speed. If during this exercise, your accuracy ever dips below the accuracy that your target score require, that tends to suggest that you're going a bit too fast. You should get a little bit more time doing 10 easy to medium questions in with a little bit of more time than you just gave yourself, or 2 easy to medium games or 2 easy to medium passages. So that's the exercise that I would encourage. You need to shave off a little bit more time before you're ready for test speed. Now, there are a few issues that test takers experience during practice time. We want to talk about these because these things are things that happen to people all the time when they are now concentrating on speed or simply have a little bit of time pressure put on them. First thing is losing accuracy. The number one reason that people lose accuracy during practice time, at least early on, is because they're just reading too fast. So they're trying to, it's just that when you know there's a clock ticking down, something triggers in your brain, whether consciously or unconsciously, that's just like, I gotta read this faster. When you read it faster, you're torpedoing your accuracy. Remember lesson number 2, reading too fast is not, reading too slow is not the problem. Reading faster is not the solution. You have plenty of time to read. And in fact, reading conscientiously, like reading carefully with a lot of consideration and thought, under time pressure is arguably the #1 most important skill you're building during practice time. So if you notice your accuracy dipping, one thing that might be happening is you might just be, whether consciously or unconsciously, reading faster than you were in the learning time. Another thing that happens is that people lose accuracy as a result of just bailing on those sound approaches that they were practicing and getting really good at in learning time. #1 thing that people avoid doing in practice time is anticipating the right answer. Anticipation, in my opinion, is the #1 skill that increases accuracy on the test. Anticipating the right answer for logical reasoning questions, reading comprehension passages, and anticipating the right answer on logic games through careful deductions or scenario/world building is such an important skill for both accuracy and timing. And remember, approach and understanding are the things that lead you to go faster. And if you have a really strong approach and understanding, you will be able to anticipate and as a result, go faster. What happens to a lot of test takers is during practice time, they're like, oh, I don't have time to anticipate anymore. Forgetting that anticipation is many times the things that help them go faster on the test. So if you're not anticipating during this, you're bailing on that, and you see your accuracy result and your accuracy go down as a result, start anticipating under the time pressure. Another thing people bail on, diagramming conditional statements, building out scenarios or worlds in logic games, annotating passages. This goes back to, remember, misconception #3, this takes too long, so I shouldn't do it on the test. These are not things that take too long. There is not viable alternatives to these. These are things that we should still be doing for our accuracy on this. Jonathan, I'm not the voice in the video. That would be the owner for most of those, although there's some other instructors who have voiced some of those videos. I started here fairly recently. There might be in some videos soon. We'll see. Okay. What are some other issues that test takers experience during practice time? Well, if you're still not finishing on time, it's like, okay, I got my accuracy up in learning time, my understanding is good, my approach is good, I did those exercises to get me to comfortably answer 10 logical reasoning questions in 15 minutes and 2 passages and games in 15 minutes. I'm still not finishing the section. And we'll talk about 2 solutions to this in just a bit. If you're still not finishing on time at this point, we got you covered with 2 different solutions. We'll do that in the finishing touches section. Now, another thing that you want to think about during practice time is figuring out, once you're taking practice exams, once you're ready to take practice exams, is whether your errors, whether the missed questions are the result of not having a good understanding or approach, or whether you just made a silly little mistake created by the time pressure itself. And in order to make the determination, what I would recommend doing is, after taking the exam, redo the questions untimed. You can redo all of the questions, or if you don't have the time to do that, just all the questions you missed or all the questions you didn't feel 100% confident on. And you want to do it without seeing what the correct answer is. If you can do it without even seeing what you put on the initial test, like wait a day so you kind of forget, that's great too. What you want to do is take the exam, put in all of your responses, take the exam a second time without seeing the right answer or what you selected the first time, and just try it again without any time pressure at all. If you do that, kept the same answer, so same answer the second untimed attempt that you did the first timed attempt, you got it right, that's awesome. You understood the question, got it right on both attempts. That's not something you need to address on your review. In fact, you should be very happy about that. You understand that part of the test. Let's say you changed it, but you got it right. So it's like, okay, when I did it timed, I got it wrong, but on the second attempt, I got it right. That's going to be a timing issue. And you probably missed that as a result of the time pressure. And so at least you figured out, okay, the reason I probably got this wrong was the timing. Could have just been a silly mistake, especially if on the second attempt, you kind of explain the right and wrong answers confidently and articulate it very clearly. So before the next exam, just consider getting some more on-time practice, maybe doing one of those practices, those exercises we talked about earlier. If you changed your response and your original response was correct, so the first timed response was correct, the second untimed was incorrect, that's going to be a confidence issue. You probably just talked yourself out of the correct answer. That tends to be an understanding or approach issue. So consider getting untimed practice with that passage type or game type or logical reasoning question type to reinforce your understanding of that question and gain more confidence. But that type of passage or question or game should have a lower priority in your review. Now, if you kept it the same in both attempts, got it wrong in both attempts, or you changed it and neither was right, that's going to be a serious understanding issue. That means you probably misunderstood part of that question. You didn't use the right approach for that question. That is one that you're going to want to prioritize in a review. Consider going back to your lesson videos or your resources to get a thorough review of that and getting extensive untimed practice. And that type of question or passage or game should have the highest priority in your review. So this is the exercise that you're going to want to do after practice exams to determine, okay, did I miss it because of understanding? In which case I should do a lot of repetitive untimed practice, or did I get it wrong because of timing? In which case I can just do some more time practice before your next exam. Now, this may look familiar to you. A lot of people refer to this as blind review. That's what this process is called. I don't love that term personally because to me, it doesn't seem like a very good description. Like this is neither blind nor review, but that's what it's called. And it's a really sound approach to uncover why you missed something and how to address that before the practice exam. Let's see. Got a couple of questions before we move on to this last section. So I will address those. While we're on the last few minutes of a section, is there anything we can do to make better guesses for the remaining questions? Now, that's a question from Jonathan. So basically like, okay, if there's only a couple minutes left and I have like 10 questions left or 5 questions left, what should I do to guess? Well, it really depends. There's a number of strategies that you can do, and we're going to actually talk about some of those strategies in this section, but it really depends on how much of that section you still need to do. If you have like 1 minute left and 5 questions left to guess on, you should just guess on all of those. Just pure guess. You can put B for all of them, or C for all of them, or D for all of them, or whatever answer choice you want, because that's really all the time that you have. And if you notice that you have like 5 minutes left and maybe a number of questions, maybe you can guess on all of them and be kind of selective with which ones you try. Maybe you're like, okay, I know these ones at the very end of the section tend to be a little bit easier. Maybe I try those first. Or maybe this question type is one that I feel really comfortable with. So I'm going to try to do an honest attempt on this one. Those are things you can do with the answer choices. There's certain types of questions where you can kind of scan the answer choices and get a feel for which one seems like it's most likely to be correct. For instance, for like parallel reasoning questions, what I tend to do on those, if I don't have a lot of time, is just look at the conclusion of each answer choice and see which ones match the conclusion of the argument and the stimulus. And I just pick one of those. Usually there's only like 2 or 3 of those, so you kind of like, you're giving a better guess in that situation. Other times I know certain answer choices should be stronger in their language. Other times I know answer choices should be weaker in their language, so I err towards those. So it really just depends, and this is something you kind of want to experiment with a lot of practice, Jonathan. Mary has a question kind of related to more LSAT content understanding. She's referring to negating invalid necessary conditions. or reverse invalid. So I would encourage you, Mary, if you are an LSATMax student, attend office hours on that. We hold those all the time. You'll be able to learn about those carefully, or you learn about those. But we refer to them in LSATMax is if you are making an invalid inference on a conditional statement because you switched the terms but didn't negate them, or because you negated the terms and didn't switch them. To give you an example, I'm in Los Angeles. So you can say as a conditional statement, if you're in Los Angeles, then you must be in California. What you can't do is just reverse those. You can't say if you're in California, then you must be in Los Angeles. Because of course, there's a number of other places that you can be in California, if not Los Angeles. You also can't say if you're not in Los Angeles, then you're not in California for the same reason. You can be in a lot of other places. So that's essentially what that means. And that's all there really is to it. But if you still have questions about that, I encourage you to attend one of our office hours if you are an LSATMax student, or just become an LSATMax student. We can attend those office hours or watch those lesson videos. If you have more questions about that, I'm happy to address that at the end of this as well. All right, let's move on to our final section before question time, which is the finishing touches. So what do I mean by the finishing touches? So you've made improvements through learning time and practice time, but you're still not completing the sections. There are two viable solutions that you can implement depending on your target score. Viable solution number one is you can implement some test-taking strategies to answer more questions. This is kind of what Jonathan was referring to earlier in his question that we just talked about. And these can be used by any test taker, irrespective of your target score, whether you're aiming for a 180 or a 150 or whatever it might be, you can implement these strategies. Another viable strategy that you can use is actually shortening the test. And that can be used by any test taker whose target score is below 170. If you're aiming for that 170 or more, shortening the test generally isn't the best solution, though I have seen it employed effectively before. But if your target score is below 170, you can shorten that test and make the timing easier and hopefully your accuracy better as a result. Let's talk about what you can do to shorten the test and how much of this test you can shorten in just a second. But first, talk about test taking strategies to answer more questions. Got a question, what's the lowest test score you can get and still get into law school? There is no lowest score. There are law schools that will accept more or less any LSAT score. That said, a couple things when selecting a law school, you really, really want to go to an ABA accredited law school. If you are not going to an ABA accredited law school, you might not be able to take the bar exam in your state and become a lawyer, and your likelihood of getting a job is a lot lower. So when you're thinking of what law schools to go to, only look at ABA accredited law schools. It's also true that you should go to as good of a school as you can get into, that you want to go to, of course. And as you can imagine, the better the school, the higher score that you're going to require. So the lowest test score that you can get and still get into law school is the lowest test score the school you want to go to will accept from you. And so that's going to take a little bit of research on your end. So research the law schools that you want to go into, make sure they're ABA accredited, make sure it's a place you want to go to, make sure that they have good bar passage rates, good employment rates, because those are things you care about after leaving law school, and then see what their median LSAT scores are. Okay. So let's talk about answering more questions. The first solution if you're still not finishing on time. How can we answer more questions on an actual practice exam? Well, first thing, this is a little bit paradoxical, but skipping questions. Skipping questions is a really, really good strategy on the LSAT because every single question on the LSAT is worth the same amount of points. Some questions take a long time though. Some questions are really, really hard. They're designed so only like 20 or 30% of the test takers will actually get that question correct. So if you're skipping questions, you're not giving up. In fact, you're being smart and strategic. You're saying, rather than invest my time into a question I'm likely to get wrong, I'm going to invest that time into multiple questions that I'm likely to get correct. So not just bumping your head against a question that's really difficult and time consuming and you're likely to get it wrong anyways, but rather reinvesting that time into multiple questions that you're likely to get right is a very effective approach. But you have to skip strategically on the test. There's a number of questions you can skip. One are time consuming questions. These are questions like rule substitution or fully determined questions and logic games. These just tend to be the hardest, most time-consuming questions. Flawed parallel reasoning is a really common one in logical reasoning. Bizarro or accept questions in reading comprehension. These are things that take a lot of time to earn that 1 point. But a lot of times it can just be that time you spend on these questions can be better invested into multiple questions. You can also consider skipping questions that you know you're less accurate on. There might be a question type that you're not as comfortable with. Might be a couple in each section. Those are questions you might want to skip. Sorry. Now, a couple of principles when you're skipping questions. Generally speaking, you should not skip any questions in the first half of the section. Questions in aggregate tend to be more difficult as the section goes on. So as you progress through the section, questions tend to get more difficult. This is especially true on logical reasoning, but it also tends to be true on logic games and reading comprehension as well. So you don't want to skip the earlier, easier questions just so you have more time to do the later, generally more difficult questions. Another principle you want to keep in mind as you skip questions, always register a guess. So it's like, okay, I know I'm going to skip this question, but at least select something. It can be at random. You can, maybe make an educated guess, but always put something down because there's no guessing penalty on the LSAT. If you guess, you have at minimum a 20% chance of getting it correct. Another thing you should do is flag that question. There's a little flag icon when you take the test online. If you click that flag, it'll show up in the list of questions at the bottom of your screen. And so if you have time at the end of the section, you can know to go back to that one and try it again. So now I'm seeing it for the second time. Gives you a new set of fresh eyes. Seeing it again a second time makes it seem easier. You can get it right. So having it flagged so you know which ones to go back to is an important thing to do. So you can skip questions, but make sure they're not the first half questions. Make sure to register a guess on them and make sure to flag them. So if you have time, you can go back to them. Another thing you can do to answer more questions is setting a hard cap on how long you're willing to attempt a question or how many answer choices you're willing to entertain before moving on. This is something that some test takers might want to do if they notice they consistently kind of butt their heads against a question and take, 2, 3, 4 minutes trying to answer it. Because you're just so stubborn. You're like, I know I can get this right. I just need some time. So you just go at it and go at it and go at it. Reread, reread. Ultimately spend 4 minutes on it when you maybe got it right. When you could have spent those 4 minutes on doing 2 or 3 or 4 questions that you maybe would have even a better chance of getting it correct. So another instructor at LSATMax, I'm going to use his method as an example. What he would do is he would go through the answer choices. He would eliminate all the ones he knew was wrong. If he could get it down to 3 or fewer, you would reread the stimulus if necessary, take a look at the remaining answer choices that he hasn't already eliminated, look for reasons to eliminate those answer choices. And if he can eliminate 2 of them, he'd select the last one and move on. If he couldn't eliminate one on that point, he would guess and flag it and move on to the next question. So he set a hard cap on, okay, I'm only going to entertain basically 3 answer choices. then I'll reread it a second time, and then I'll move on. If you can only eliminate one answer choice or no answer choices after going through them the first time, you would move on right then and there. So this kind of hard cap can be just something you put into place that forces you to not spend too much time on a question. A lot of test takers have success using this. Another thing you can do is doing the questions out of order. There's no rules that you have to progress through the questions, 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and so on. In fact, doing sections and questions out of order has never been easier on the LSAT. Because now you don't even have a Scantron that you have to worry about bubbling. You're just doing everything online. So you're registering your selections when you do that question. You're not bubbling something else. There's no opportunity to miss bubble. So doing sections out of the order can have a lot of benefits. You can do certain questions, like the second half of the questions first, when you're less fatigued. You're a little bit sharper on those questions. You're more likely to get those right. You're not spending as much time on them. And when you're rushing through stuff, it's like the easier stuff that can be rushed through. Or you could do the passages or games with the most questions first. Like, hey, I know this passage with 8 questions. That's a lot of questions. I want to take the time I need to earn all 8 of those points and do the passage with the fewest questions last. So you don't have to rush through anything. At least it's not a ton of questions that I'm risking putting on the table, losing points on. This is something you can experiment through your practice exams, how you approach those sections to give yourself the best chance at answering as many questions as you can. Another thing you could do is something that I'm going to refer to as either lowering the confidence bar or making educated guesses. Sometimes we want to be 100% confident, or as close to 100% confident that we can be. The problem is if getting from 90% confident to 100% confident takes a lot of time, requires a lot of rereading. It's especially true on reading comprehension. It's often true on logic games or logical reasoning as well. Sometimes just getting from 90% confident to 100% confident is not worth the time. It's like, okay, 90% confident, I still feel pretty good about it. Let's go with that. I'm not going to waste time becoming 100% confident. I'm going to use that time to allow me to answer later questions. Another thing you can do is just make educated guesses. As your understanding and approaches really develop in that learning time, you're going to get a strong sense of what correct answers and incorrect answers tend to do on this exam. You're going to know, for instance, the question types where you want to look for weaker or softer language, and the answer choices where you want to look for more intense, stronger language. I'll use parallel reasoning questions as an example again. These are the questions that say like the reasoning and the argument above, most parallels, which are the following arguments. You kind of have to pick two different you have to pick the answer choice that features an argument that has like the same structure as the argument in the stimulus. For those, a lot of times I'm just going to be like, okay, I know that the conclusions have to kind of be similar. They have to have the same scope and modality and type of relationship expressed. So just read through all the conclusions of the answer choices and eliminate all of those that have a different conclusion than the stimulus does. That usually leaves me with like 2 or 3 answer choices. Sometimes it's like one answer choice, you just select that one and move on. Go for 2 or 3, then you like read the premises and just kind of guess like, okay, this one seems to have premises that do a similar thing to the premises in the stimulus. So I'm going to go with this one. I'm not 100% certain that it's the same, but this is an educated guess. And sometimes the time you spend making these educated guesses leads you to the right answer, and you don't spend nearly as much time doing it. And that enables you to answer more questions later on. You can do similar things on reading comprehension. I know something that you can do effectively for reading comprehension is when you're reading through the answer choices, you're like, okay, this answer choice, I don't really remember reading about that. This answer choice, I don't really remember about reading that. This answer choice, I don't really remember that. Well, this answer choice seems vaguely familiar. The rest of the answer choices, I don't really remember. I'm not going to go back to the passage and confirm that this details in the passage. I'm just going to rely on my memory to make this educated guess. This educated guess takes 20 seconds to make. Going back to the passage might take 2 minutes of my time. I'm better off making this educated guess. So that is something you can do to enable you to answer more questions. Oh, and for logic games with educated guesses, one thing that's really helpful is just knowing which players are kind of the most restricted. If you're doing a must be false question, which of the following must be false, you see some players mentioned in an answer choice that you're like, all right, I know these players are very restricted, constrained. I'm going to test this answer choice first. Or if you're doing a must be true question, you see some answer choices with some very restricted players. Like, all right, that's probably not correct. I'm not going to test that one. Those are some things you can do to make kind of educated guesses or lowering the confidence bar. So again, these are strategies that any test taker, irrespective of their target score, can implement to try to answer more questions. Basically, allocating your time so you're answering the most questions you can while maintaining the accuracy that you want. Another thing that test takers can do is shortening the test. We mentioned earlier that this isn't necessarily available as a strategy for people who really want the highest of high scores, like 99 percentile scores. Probably not going to be able to do this, but if your target score is lower than that, this is definitely something you should think about doing. For some, maximizing the points they receive on the LSAT results from minimizing the number of questions that they attempt. Basically, if you shorten the test, you are increasing the time you can spend on all those questions that you're attempting. If you're also shortening the test strategically, you can make the test easier. You're not spending any time on the hardest stuff, and you're instead allocating all your time to the questions that you have the highest likelihood of answering correctly. Now, obviously, you're going to just guess on some questions. So who knows if you're going to get those wrong. For a lot of test takers, they actually get more points by attempting fewer questions on this exam. You do this in a number of ways. You can do just 3 passages of the 4 in a section, or just 3 games of the 4 in a section. Or you can choose to skip and guess on a certain number of logical reasoning questions. And I should here clarify that when I say you're doing 3 passages, you're guessing on all of the answers for the 4th passage. If you're just doing 3 games, you're guessing on all of the answers in the 4th game that you don't do. And if you're skipping LR questions, you're guessing on all of those that you skip. Remember, you should never leave anything blank on the LSAT. If you leave something blank, you have a 0% chance of getting it correct. If you don't leave it blank, if you register a guess, you have at least a 20% chance of getting it correct. But what shortening the test can do by skipping and guessing on a certain percentage of the exam is that you make your accuracy higher, because you're giving yourself more time to do the easier parts of the exam. So your accuracy goes up as a result. Now, as I mentioned, for most test takers, you can't do this and earn a 170 or higher. Now, it's not impossible. I have had students in the past who would only do 3 games and still earn above a 170. This was because they were very, very good, as you can imagine, on the other 2 sections. It's especially harder now to skip a game or a passage on the 3-section LSAT because individual games and passages have a higher impact on your score relative to the old 4-section LSAT, where there are 2 logical reasoning sections. So skipping a game, skipping a passage and earning a 170 or higher is pretty difficult on the exam now. So if you're aiming for a 170 or higher, wouldn't try to skip a lot of the exam. You should instead attempt to do the first solution, which is using some strategies to maximize the number of questions that you're answering. And this is because if you want to earn a 170 or higher, you can miss at most 8 questions. Unless you're nearly perfect on all the parts of the exam, skipping 1 passage or game or 5 to 7 questions on an LR section gives you too little margin of error. So it's not impossible, but it just gives you so little margin for error that I wouldn't recommend it. However, If you want to earn between a 165 and a 170, you can generally skip one passage, or skip one game, or skip 5 to 7 LR questions if you're very accurate elsewhere. But you can only do one of these three things: one passage and do all the games and do all the LR questions, or skip one game, do all the passages, do all the LR questions, or skip 5 to 7 LR questions, but you're doing all the passages and doing all the games. This is because to earn a 165 to 170, you can miss 9 to 15 questions on the flex. This is what we're estimating. There hasn't been a lot of score conversion charts released for the flex, but given on the one that they have released, the May 2020 LSAT flex, you can miss 9 to 15 questions and earn a score between those 165 and 170. So that's kind of what I'm using as my assumption here. So you skip and guess on one passage or one game or 5 to 7 LR questions, you're kind of missing based on our estimates, about 4 to 6 questions. You might skip one passage that has 7 questions. You guess on all of them, statistically should guess one of those correctly, so you're getting a -6. If you're skipping one game that has 6 questions, you should, statistically speaking, get one of those guesses correct, so you're missing -5. If you skip 5 LR questions, you guess on all 5, statistically should guess one of those correctly, you get a -4. So you can miss 9 to 15 questions, but if you skip one passage, one game, 5 to 7 LR questions, you're only sacrificing 4 to 6 of those points. So you can still miss somewhere between 3 and 11 other questions. So it's a strategy that's available for you. If you want to earn a 160 to 165, you can usually skip 2 of the above. So you can skip one passage and one game, or one passage and 5 to 7 LR questions. And that's because if you're skipping and guessing on 2 of those things, you're missing somewhere between -8 and -12 points. But to earn that score of 160 to 165, you can miss somewhere between 15 and 22 questions. So you still have a good deal of room for error. So if your accuracy is really high, which hopefully it will be if you're shortening the test, you can skip 2 of those if that's your target score. Target score is below 160, you can generally skip 3 of the above if you want to. Or you can skip like 2 passages in one game. That's because if you're aiming for 160 or below, you can miss 22 questions at least. And skipping on 3 of those passages, games, or LR questions puts you somewhere between a -15 and -17. So you still, again, have some room for error. So if your target score is somewhere in this range of 165 to 170 or 160 to 165 or below 160, you can consider shortening the test, increasing your accuracy by giving yourself more time to answer fewer questions. But this is how much I would recommend skipping based on your target score. So hopefully that makes sense to y'all. Again, you really want to be strategic with what you skip. Unless it's very obviously difficult, don't skip a passage or game with the most questions. So you don't want to skip a passage with 8 questions or a game with 7 questions. If you can, try skipping the passage or games with only 5 questions, if there is one. Generally, logical reasoning questions between question 16 and 23 are the best to skip. Those tend to be the most difficult. Questions at the very end of the section and questions in the first half of the section tend to be a little bit easier. You'll see a request to go back to the skipping chart, so I'll do that again, put that on the board. So to answer the question, is it better to guess and not skip? Well, skipping just means not doing an honest attempt at the question, like reading it carefully, trying to anticipate it, looking at all the answer choices carefully. When I'm saying skipping, I'm just saying like, don't read it, don't worry about it, just guess, just put down B or C or whatever randomly. Does anyone have any questions about this? Because we're heading towards the end of this presentation. Just got a few more things to say about LSATMax. So if there are any questions, you can go ahead and put them. Any questions related to what we just talked about, you can go ahead and put them in this section. Let's see, a question from Anna. Would you recommend we guess just one letter for the entire test? If you're truly making a guess, like if it's not any attempt to take an educated guess, you can do the same letter, you can do different letters. It doesn't really matter. You're really mostly dealing with a 20% chance no matter what. If you're going to try to game the system into your favor, I wouldn't think about like guessing a specific letter. I would think about making educated guesses. It's like I was talking about, knowing which answer choices sound kind of correct based on what you know about that question type. So for instance, question types that say, which of the following is most strongly supported by the information above? The right answers to those tend to have weaker, softer sounding language. So an educated guess on that would be a question, an answer choice that had weaker, softer language. It's not guaranteeing that you're gonna get it right, but you can kind of nudge that percentage point, few clicks in your favor. How long should I study before the test? It depends. Depends on where you're starting. It depends on how much time you have to study. It depends on how big of a score increase you're trying to make. It depends on how you're studying. There's not one right answer for one test taker. I would say 4 months is kind of the most typical study process. 2 months in learning time, 2 months in practice time. But like I said, it really varies. If you want to know how long you should study, that's something that you can definitely talk to. If you sign up for LSATMax, you can talk to one of our advisors, you can talk to one of our tutors, you can talk to some of our instructors during office hours. We can give you a better appraisal of how long you should study based on, you know, really what you're trying to do with this test and how much time you have to study for it. All right. Awesome. And thank you for signing up. For those that haven't signed up, let's talk about LSATMax. So we're talking about LSATMax at this point. Swear, gotta tell you, but all the great things that LSATMax can help you do in your study process. So 3 different packages you can purchase with LSATMax, but you're gonna get the same thing with all 3 of them. You get that #1 ranked online LSAT course. It's really just how long you want to study with LSATMax for. Do you want to study with us for 60 days, 180 days, or for a full year? And like I mentioned earlier, I was at a different test prep company for a long time before moving to LSATMax recently. And what I love about the LSATMax app that really distinguishes it from the place I was at previously, a lot of other test prep companies, is that TestMax really found a solution for multiple different kinds of students. Now, some students really like to follow a plan. I'm going to learn things in this order. I'm going to learn it one at a time. I'm going to follow the process that's proven, that's effective, that helps many, many people earn major score increases. LSATMax's app has a series of video modules that you can follow and a series of homework for each module that you can do to help you follow that proven study plan. Other test takers, like, no, I want to forge my own path. I have my own individual strengths and weaknesses. I have the things I want to focus on. Maybe I want to do a lot of prep tests instead of doing tons of videos. Maybe I want to go to office hours rather than learning for videos and learn from a live instructor. Maybe I want to retake prep tests multiple times to track my improvement there. Well, you can do that with LSATMax too. With our app, it's really flexible. You can filter for each section of the LSAT if you want to target a specific section. You can take all 90 prep tests. You can do all those prep tests multiple times where you get score analytics that tell you how you did each time, which areas you're doing strongly at, which areas you need to improve on. You can track your progress across multiple attempts. You can also do all of those prep tests as a 4-section test or a 3-section test, depending on which LSAT you're going to take. So you have all of those things at your fingertips that allow you to either follow a plan that's been set in front of you or forge your own plan. And because LSATMax doesn't sink our money into a lot of things that really increase the overhead at other test prep companies, we can offer this for you at a dramatic discount compared to other places. Other test prep companies might charge for 60 days of access to an app and course. You might charge 3 times that. They might charge more for 3 months of access than we charge for a full year of access. So you get all of these benefits, the opportunity to do things with a path that's been determined for you or by setting your own path, which is really cool. Now, we have also tutoring that you can purchase. You get one-on-one tutoring with a 99th percentile test taker. And one thing that's great about these 99th percentile test takers is that none of them were naturals. They're all going through the same struggle, or they all went through the same struggles that you might be going through in your own study process. They know how to relate to you, and they know how to solve those problems that you have. And these same instructors do daily office hours. They cover a particular section of the LSAT every single day, live, so that you can see how they're teaching it, get that experience, pick the right tutor for you if you're going to go with one-on-one tutoring, and just learn more about the LSAT. And here's what some of our students said. So I'll leave this on the screen while I answer some questions. So if you're not answering, if I'm not answering a question that you have, you can kind of see what some other people said about LSATMax. And I'm gonna take a look at the questions now. So if you don't have any further questions, you're leaving, I bid you farewell. I wish you the best of luck with timing and all other aspects of the test. If you had a question, I'm gonna go through and answer them now. Okay, first question is from an anonymous attendee. Is it better to exclusively take lsat-flex versions of practice tests, knowing you'll be taking the lsat-flex on test day? So a little bit of context, lsat-flex is the version of the LSAT that LSAC introduced in May of 2020, and every test since May of 2020 up until this point has been this flex test. It's an at-home LSAT with only 3 sections, 1 logical reasoning section, 1 logic game section, 1 reading comprehension section. Traditionally, the LSAT had 4 scored sections, 2 of which were logical reasoning sections, 1 of which was a reading comp, and 1 of which was a logic game section. It could also be an unscored experimental section. So the question is, if I'm taking the LSAT Flex, by the way, the last LSAT Flex is going to be in June. If I'm taking that LSAT Flex, should I only take LSAT Flex versions of practice test? Now, I'm going to say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is that it's really hard to get an accurate score when you take an LSAT Flex exam. Because unless you're taking the May 2020 LSAT Flex, no one knows how to scale the score that you get on your test to a 120 to 180 score scale. Basically, you don't know how many questions you would have to get on 1 logical reasoning section, 1 logic game section, and 1 reading comprehension section to earn a given score. We're all just kind of making our best guesses there, but that information has not been released. So to get an accurate score, what you would need to do is to take that 4-section version of the test. So it's a little bit annoying that you're taking a longer test than you're going to take on test day. To get those accurate score updates, I would recommend taking the full test. It's also a good idea to take the full test because, remember, we take practice exams to get information about ourselves. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? Do we need to work on timing? Do we need to work on understanding? What is it? Just doing a longer test gives you more information to guide your studies, and that's going to ultimately be better for you. Now, as you get closer to the exam, definitely take LSAT Flex versions of the test. But as you're kind of further out from the test, maybe at this point, if you're taking the June test, still take 4 sections to get into the last couple of weeks before the test date, then start taking LSAT Flex versions. That's my recommendation, at least. Let's see. Another question is from Alicia. It says, I had 9 minutes left during an LR section. What would be the best use of this extra time? Did a bit of review and didn't change anything. Honestly, that is the best use of your time, just going back through the questions you flagged, taking a closer look at them. Honestly, when people end with that much time, I'm usually like a little bit nervous that you're going too fast through part of it. Having 5 minutes left during an LR section can be totally normal. Having like almost 10 minutes makes me think you're maybe moving a little bit too fast, not using the right approaches on all of it. So that's something I would consider addressing. But if you're really accurate at that time, that's cool. I think you did the right thing with that extra time that you did have. So another question relates to accommodations. Any suggestions on how to incorporate timing accommodations to take practice tests? Just take practice tests with your accommodated time. So if you receive 53 minutes per section, take practice tests using 53 minutes per section. You should be practicing the test like you're going to take the test. Let's see. Mary asking you share tips on how to avoid picking the wrong answer when you're stuck between two answer choices. A really common question. Now, I will say this. When you get stuck to two, there's a reason for that. That's what the test writers want you to do. They usually put the right answer and one really attractive wrong answer in there because they want you to debate between those two answer choices. So in your study process, especially during that learning time section of your study process, what you really want to do is work on anticipation. So you reduce the number of times that you're stuck between two answer choices. That is the surest, most reliable means to avoid that situation altogether and ultimately get faster on this test. But even then, there still are inevitable times that you get stuck between two answer choices. It happens to everyone. It happened to me if I took the test tomorrow. So what do you do when you're stuck between two answer choices? Here's what a lot of test takers do. They look at those two answer choices. Maybe they reread the stimulus or look at the game and the setup again, or look at parts of the passage again and say, okay, which one of these seems more right? But that is an incorrect and ineffective way to look at things. You should look at which one seems more right to you, because there's no such thing as a more right question on the LSAT. Things are either right or they're wrong. Second, it's ineffective because you already looked for the one that looked most right, and you're left with two. So if you're still looking at those two answer choices through the lens of which one is more right, you're really just repeating the same strategy that didn't get you to the right answer the first time. So you're stuck between two. Don't look for things or reasons that make an answer choice more right. Look for reasons that make an answer choice wrong. You should be looking at those answer choices very skeptically, looking for problems with those answer choices. Most commonly for reading comprehension and logical reasoning, that answer choice that's wrong is misrepresenting something in the passage or stimulus. It's lying to you. It's saying something happened in that passage or stimulus that didn't happen. So look for those errors. When you focus on which one has a problem, you're not repeating the same strategy left with two answer choices. You're looking at them through a new lens that will hopefully allow you to pick the right answer choice more consistently. See, another question about accommodations. Answered that one. Good luck if you're pursuing getting those. See, question, how can you be sure if you're using the right approaches? You know, if there are any videos, courses, books, or curriculum that go over all the right and wrong approaches, you're in the right place. LSATMax, all the right approaches. Now, there are things are the right approaches because they're sound, they're proven. LSATMax has all of those approaches. You need to make sure that you have the right version of that approach. So you might need to tweak things along the way so that it makes sense to you. That's something tutoring or office hours can really provide at LSATMax. But they're right because they're proven, and they're also right because they work for you. So there's occasionally times where it's like, okay, this exact approach isn't perfect for me, so I'm just gonna make a little light tweak on it so it is perfect on me. But it's right if it gets you the right answer. Increases your accuracy. Let's see, another question. Taking the exam for the second time in June, I'm guessing that it's still a good idea to take my time studying without time sections, then pick time sections back up closer to the exam. When I run out of time, it's only by a few minutes. Yeah, just to reiterate, when you switch from untimed learning time to timed practice time, it's when your accuracy on time exceeds the accuracy that your target score require. So don't make that switch, Lauren, until you're consistently answering questions an accuracy rate that exceeds the accuracy rate needed by your target score, whatever that might be. So notice the 1 hour of free tutoring is 1 hour. It's not 1 hour for each day. So you have 1 free hour with the tutor to answer your questions and decide if you want to have more tutoring. Noah asks, I'm an LSATMax student. I've been out of college for about 7 years and recently decided that I would like to try and get into law school. My GPA was pretty low, can be overcome by a high enough score on this test. Yeah, there's actually a term for the situation you're in, Noah. It's kind of a strange one. You're called a splitter. People who have a high LSAT score and a low GPA are called splitters. And it is better to be a splitter, high LSAT score, lower GPA, than it is to be a reverse splitter, as they're called, high GPA, lower LSAT score. And that's because an LSAT score is more important to law school admissions officials than a GPA. So it's okay if your GPA isn't up to standards of a particular school, you can rescue that GPA with a high LSAT score. That said, when you're looking at the median LSAT scores of schools, look at their 75th percentile LSAT score. That's the score you should be aiming for. If your GPA is a little bit lower, you want to have a comparatively higher LSAT score. And I was in the same position as you. No, not the best GPA, with a good LSAT score. I was able to get a merit-based scholarship. So not the worst position to be in the world. Just aim for that 75th percentile LSAT score. Let's see, a question. Anonymous question. If you do questions out of order, but the questions tend to get harder as you go through a section, would this help? Or are the first questions of every passage, like logic games or reading comp, always easier? So doing questions out of order can help for a variety of reasons. Some people like to do the harder stuff first when they're less fatigued. It's like, okay, I'm not as tired. I can be a little bit sharper, a little more clear. My thought processes, so I have a better chance of getting the harder stuff right. The end, I'm a little more tired. I can still do the easier stuff, so I'm going to save those for last. So again, you really just want to kind of experiment with approaches as you do practice exams during that practice time section. Abigail asks, how many weeks, months are typically spent in the practice time stage? It depends. Many students spend 2 months in each stage. Some students do 3 months in learning, 1 month in the practice. Some people spend, 2 months in learning, 3 months in the practice. It really depends. And that's why I love, by the way, LSATMax, how flexible the process can be. You can spend as much or as little time in each of those 2 phases as you need. So it's really just going to depend. You'd have to monitor your strengths and weaknesses, your timing, your understanding, your approaches, all of that. It's hard to give a prescriptive statement on that because every student is different, of course. Let's see. Another anonymous question. What tips can you offer on which answers to pick after? Oh, I already answered this. So yeah, if you're down to just 2, then pick the one that has a problem, for them with problems on your mind. But yeah, as you kind of allude to in this, you can kind of base your decision on the type of questions. So the example you gave was like sufficient assumption questions. Pick the broader answer choice or stronger answer choice. That can be an effective means of doing so. Let's see, another anonymous question. Are there other tutors available to all LSATMax students other than the private tutors? No, every one of our private tutors can be available as long as that the time you want to meet is consistent with when they're available to meet. So yeah, if you have questions about that, let us know. Type into our customer service representatives. My LSAT score, I got a 173. Last time I took it. Let's see. How long do you know if when you've reached your ceiling? Feels like there's always room for improvement, but not everyone can get a 180 or close. That's a determination you have to make for yourself. Score plateaus are normal. Score plateaus can be overcome. I'm personally of the opinion that almost any test taker can get almost any score. So I don't think many test takers reach their ceiling on this exam. It all depends on just having the right study plan and executing it correctly. So if you think you've reached your ceiling, good chance you're just hitting a score plateau that can be overcome. That's my answer for that. Yeah, so to answer your question, Laura, which median should you be after? The 25th percentile, the 50th percentile, or the 75th percentile? Depends on your GPA. It's worth saying that this last law school application cycle was very competitive. A lot of people applying with good scores. So based on the competitiveness, it wouldn't hurt to aim for the higher 75th percentile scores for the schools you're looking after. But if you have a tremendous GPA, a tremendous personal statement, tremendous letters of recommendation, those can go a long ways too. But I don't think it'd hurt right now to aim for the 75th. But if your GPA is within the 25th to 75th percentile range, then a lot of times you can't get in with that 50th percentile. So it looks like there were some questions in the chat section too. What should we do when we reach a study burnout? Take a day off, take care of yourself, see friends, see family, do the things that keep you healthy and happy and sane. And it's important to try to avoid burnout ahead of time, not just to react when you do feel burnout, but try to do the things that help avoid burnout. So taking like one day off a week, if you can, eating healthy, exercising, making sure you're continuing to do the hobbies that keep you happy. All of those are important to avoid burnout in the first place. Linda has a question. If you're to book a private tutoring session, would be the best way to maximize that session? Having many things prepared, working through a section. I know when I've done private tutoring, which I've done a lot of, always had the most productive sessions when the person came prepared the specific things they wanted to work on. I know I struggle with this question type. I know I have this problem when I'm doing practice exams. I consistently do this on the test. If you have very specific questions, the tutor can definitely address those. If you don't know what that problem is, then let your tutor know. I mean, the tutor will have some exercises prepared to help you prepare those things. Having a lot of your practice exams, recent practice exams available so that tutor can look through and see what your problem might be. It can be helpful if you don't know the problem, but definitely the thing that led to the most productive sessions when I tutor is when the student has very specific questions. Reginald, reverse splitter isn't bad. If I said that was poorly phrased, and I apologize. It's preferable to have a high LSAT score and a lower GPA because law schools prefer or put more weight, I should say, on your LSAT score versus your GPA. Having a good GPA definitely isn't bad. Having a good GPA is good. It's best to have a good LSAT score and a good GPA. So if you have a good GPA, definitely try to get a LSAT score commensurate with that GPA. But ultimately, being a reverse splitter isn't bad. It's just slightly less preferable to being a splitter, high LSAT score, lower. Different high LSAT score, lower GPA. So Laura has a question about graduate GPA. When calculating your GPA, the Law School Admissions Council has their own kind of calculation. It would be a little bit different than your undergraduate calculation. Not all law schools use this, but it is provided to law schools. And it doesn't include any graduate work that you might have done. So at least in the number that LSAC provides to law schools as part of your CAS report, it's not going to include the graduate GPA. Now, individual law schools might be very interested with what you did in graduate GPA. And if it doesn't hurt, you have a higher graduate level education. That's definitely going to be an asset. But in calculating the pure GPA used or provided in your credential assembly report, service report, it's not going to include the graduate work. Is there a different prep for the LSAT-flex? No, same test, same material, same content. No reason why you'd use a different strategy for the LSAT-flex. It's just a slightly different structure. The only exception to that same test rule is that just compared to old LSATs, reading comp and logic games are now more important than they were in the past. They have a bigger impact on your score. So you should maybe spend slightly more time with reading comp and logic games than was traditionally recommended. Many people would traditionally recommend spending half your time on logical reasoning, quarter of your time on reading comp, quarter of your time on games. Then you want to spend about a third of your time on each, unless you're significantly better or worse at one of those three sections. Quinn has a question about process for doing logical reasoning questions. Quinn says, do you advise reading the question stem first to identify the kind of question before reading the content? Honestly, it depends on the test taker. When I was taking the LSAT and when I taught the LSAT at a different place for years, I always advised reading the question stem first to identify the kind of questions. That's what I would still do if I was doing the LSAT. However, some people will just like reading the stem first and then reading the question type. You like to have an accurate appraisal and understanding of that stimulus before knowing what kind of question it is. It really depends on what works best for you, what you're used to. I'm a question step first kind of guy. You might be different. That's okay. Actually have a friend who did some studies into this, found out it actually doesn't really make much of a difference in terms of overall accuracy. So it's really just whatever feels more comfortable for you. That's the one I would recommend. It's probably not going to make or break your score. All right, looks like those are all the questions. Thank you all so much for hanging out today. Really enjoyed my time spent with you. Hopefully you got a lot out of this. Hopefully it helps you avoid some of those all too common stumbling blocks. So take a look at our offerings and let our customer service representatives know if you have any questions. All right, thank you all. Take care. Good luck studying. Best of luck on the exam when you choose to take it.